Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for being here with us.
Are you able to comment on what it's like not having Watson there?
No, sir.
Already tired of people talking about us like bad ways when they don't even know what's going to happen.
It was more important for us to make sure that we had as many people as we needed to be here possible to be able to learn what we're doing. And with that being said, that we would forego the mini camp because we felt like that was more important.
And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. And we've finally hit that point in the off-season, in the wait between mini-camp, or the cancelled mini-camp, to training camp. We've got a number of weeks now with nothing really on the calendar, apart from obviously the Deshaun situation that continues to loom over the team. But we've got quite a lot to talk about. This will be the last sort of flying solo episode. We just keep the content rolling steadily over this off-season. But we're here just to pick up on some points. Quite a lot to pick up on last week. With the position coaches were out in front of the media, a number of reports and a retirement and a release to discuss. Plenty going on inside the building, as always, in NRG. Hopefully you've got your power back on for those who lost it yesterday in the continual troubles of ERCOT and how they can't seem quite to get the grid right. But hope you're surviving. But I suppose the big news this week was minicamp being cancelled, caused a bit of a storm or a variance of reactions right across the spectrum, I suppose. And I said the background to it is, of course, the players' unions are trying to, or certainly JC Tretter's trying to flex a bit, trying to insert his influence and show that they've got some power. Certainly the power they showed, or the leverage they didn't show in the negotiation of the CBA, and they're almost trying to renegotiate parts, or certainly press back and push back against parts ultimately the Players Association have agreed to. So I'm surprised on some degree that teams have been as flexible as they have been. Now I think there's obviously a vaccination issue to come, probably, that's going to come ahead with some players, and you've seen certain guys speak out about that. But in terms of this, obviously all the players' unions and certain players were discouraged to turn up for OTAs. Of course, organised team activities, it's voluntary, so guys didn't have to be there. But certainly the Texans have been very quick to talk about the solid attendance, certain numbers, and one particular guy wasn't there. Certainly a story about that, but we'll keep monitoring that before we talk about that in depth. But perhaps another storyline brewing under the surface, but we'll come back to that one. But it's effectively a compromise between the team and the players, who have said, look, if there is a good attendance at this OTAs, then we won't need to run into mini camp, which is often cut short by the team. They didn't necessarily do the 2 or 3 days that was scheduled, and that's been a constant throughout the Bill O'Brien era, and they've just completely cancelled it this year. And I think there was an uproar, of course, because people say, well, you've got a new coaching staff, you've got almost 50 new players, you've got to build some cohesion, and how are you going to do it, or why are you turning away the chance of more days that are allotted to you when there isn't many days under this current CBA? Why would you turn that opportunity down? But I think that the background was a compromise with the players, meeting them somewhere in the middle, and a carrot effectively to guide them through OTAs to encourage attendance. But I think obviously Caserio, this would have been his decision. I think that was clear when you saw Cully making the point, and he was obviously reading off some notes. I don't know if that's him not confident with the media, or the fact that it's not his decision. But I think the fact that Caserio's out there so much, I think it shows you it's his show. Cully is caretaker at best, and I maintain that position. But certainly he delivered the message of that, and it's one of those things that the team will wrap up early and give the guys some time back and I think moreover, it's an admission of there's only so much you can do in gym wear, and the guys, you've not got the helmets on, you've not got the pads on, and for most of this roster, and to actually develop situational football, to develop team players in the trenches, to find out what you've got in certain guys on both sides of the ball, then you can't really develop your team all that much in a true footballing sense without the pads. And it's conditioning, and these guys should be coming ready to go in a position to contribute and not actually need so much of the conditioning element. And that's really all the OTAs and what mini camp, exactly the same conditions, no pads, everything's on air. So there's a limit to what you can do to improve the football team. And I think when you take that into consideration, did you need another day of back drills? Did you need another day of throwing routes to open receivers? No, I don't think you did. So they've had a good solid 4 weeks of it. The coaching staff seemed very vibrant and positive about the reactions of the players, and it was good to see some points of football, and hopefully this team is starting to shape up, and certainly they're making the right noises, but we'll see when training camp comes around. Talking about the coaching staff was out there, some interesting quotes, or certainly some interesting points you don't often get to hear from the coaching staff. So when you do, there's often nuggets of information in there, or certainly points, or you're able to read the tea leaves a bit and understand probably a bit more about the team than some of the more seasoned guys who are presenting to the media and the coordinators, on a weekly basis. And certainly some of the players, you don't get a huge amount out of that often. But I think that the first one was obviously Tim Kelly talking about the run game, talking about he needs to call more runs. So I think that's probably where this team hinges on a lot this season. Of they couldn't run the ball last year, they couldn't really block, they couldn't get pushed at the line, and some of the running back play was a bit blind to holes and not letting play develop. And there was a mixture of schemes. Put an article on podcasttexans.com. 1 week they were running power, next week they're running zone, and it's difficult to try and build cohesion in a running game when you've not really got core principles and stuff you're good at. So if they have found that, and if they've found a way to go and block it up front, then it'll be a way for this team to be serviceable in some instances. But I thought an interesting note of Tim Kelly, but certainly he was asked right at the start, could he comment on Deshaun's situation? Shut that one down very quickly. But I thought, in terms of calling more run plays, then hopefully there's some fundamentals being coached right now, particularly the offensive line, and that'll allow them to run the ball this season. And they're going to have to be able to do that far better than they did last season to make up for the lack of passing ability.
Well, I think the competition is really more widespread than just two players, and I do believe that. We have 8 tackles on our roster right now, and I think 7 or 8 guys that can play. We have some flexibility with our linemen, which I think that a lineman that can play more than one position and can be trained as such. Obviously, Marcus has been playing right tackle for a long time in this league, so I don't anticipate him moving very much, but other people can move around. And I think the competition isn't just with 2 players.
But James Camden, I think you've got to remember as well, I think when he's come and replaced the much maligned Mike Devlin. Mike Devlin was effectively the run game coordinator for this offense. So a lot of that, the lack of cohesion, lack of communication between the guys up front, it was obviously on Mike Devlin's door. And also the type of plays that were getting called and the type of scheme that was, the game plan that was being pieced together, a lot was Mike Devlin as well. So when you take that out of it, you hope that Tim Kelly's got a clean slate and he wasn't basically just ticking or checking off plays that had been given, because it certainly seemed like that versus the way in which he called passing plays. They were very, very different, very abstract in how they work together. So hopefully, with James Camden coming in here, then he can really give a more professional and a bit more organisation to that, and it was interesting. Obviously, the biggest quote or the biggest point, and it was referenced by Camden, it was referenced by the team media multiple times, that we should expect a shock in terms of the starting 5 guys up front. And it looks, by all intents and purposes, and almost directly quoted by Camden, that in fact Cannon will likely be right tackle if healthy. Where he is after having a year off, we don't know. And Titus Howard looks like he will be moving in, all being said. I mean, obviously there is a situation where he beats out Cannon, and Cannon's not got much left. But considering the trade, which I thought was a bit short-sighted, probably the least favourite move that we've got all off-season, we gave up a reasonable sweet spot in the draft to go and get a guy at a position you did not have a need, a position that you'd grossly overinvested in through obviously drafting Howard, then drafting Sharpen, and then obviously the ill-fated Laramie Tunstall trade. We won't go there for today. But I think when you've invested that much, when you've only got one single player who is of young quality on the salary cap, on the rookie wage scale, you've only got one guy on that roster, and you're going to endanger his development as a football player in year 3 when he's already played left guard, when you've kicked him out to right tackle, which is his best spot, and I think you should keep him there. Why would you move him inside? And look, I think, all being equal, if he hadn't played it down yet, do I think he would be... Is he more suited to be a guard? Has he got huge upside at guard? Yes, but you've not got that many years left with Marcus Cannon, I wouldn't think, who's going to be a free agent the year after next. When you've got development there, when you've got a guy who's not even played a full 16-game season, why that move was made and why you would then, even contemplate moving him aside, for me doesn't make much sense. And I think there's an element there of there is a limited amount of talent on this roster, and to mess about with the few grains or the few players that could be foundational pieces moving forward, I think messing about with that is a difficult one, because then if you move them inside, then you're looking to draft a right tackle. If somebody like Charlie Heck or Rod Johnson isn't your long-term answer, for what we've seen from them as a down and down out starter, in inverted commas, probably the only position group on the field that starter actually applies for is the offensive line. But to endanger his development going into year 3, I think is perhaps a foolish one, but we'll see where that pans out.
Well, I think Coach Cully has mentioned quite often that, hey, we're going to be a fundamental based team, and that's collective throughout the organization. We want to start by doing things the right way. And we'll see what that ultimately is. I mean, what do we have to do to win games is yet to be determined. We're still in the stages of not evaluating players, but just teaching and really, just trying to give them a fundamental base that's going to help them to play winning football during our upcoming season.
Obviously, hearing from Pep Hamilton, somebody that probably everybody was looking forward to hearing. He's probably one of the more exciting names with a bit of clout in terms of this coaching staff. And I think overall the coaching staff seemed a bit more convincing in some of their answers, and a bit more, don't get me wrong, their trains, or they've certainly been given a mandate not to give too much away, and every team does that. But I think there was definitely some, probably you felt like a bit more of a credible and more rounded coaching staff, a lot more experience certainly than we've had in the last few years under some of O'Brien's his various guys that he'd had in, predominantly on relational levels rather than pure coaching levels. But I think Pep Hamilton, he didn't really answer the question and didn't seem overly fired up about what type of offense this will be. And again, that may be part from trying not to answer that question. But I thought it was rather a muted response in terms of any direct enthusiasm about what this offense is going to be. So I think until we start to see a bit of pre-season, we start to get some more reports from training camp, when the pads go on, it's still a bit of a watch and brief on what on earth this offense will actually turn into being.
I think all that'll sort itself out. Again, right now we're just working on conditioning and just getting the base fundamentals down from a positional standpoint, and more so than plays. And I think it'll sort itself out. Again, just looking at, what each and every guy can do right now has been exciting for myself. So as we move forward to training camp, it's going to be even better. Once the competitive juices start to flow, I think we have a better feel for that.
Danny Barrett was talking there, and he was discussing the variance of players at running back that we've got in a whole cast of running backs that are on this roster right now who will be the first job. And I think like the message that came over and continues to come over is competition. One spot you probably can find competition because it's a pure production singular position on the field for the most part. In terms of having a true running back on the field, you may have two at sometimes, but we just never 22 personnel sets. We never really used that enough, apart from the Green Bay game where there was some success, but we moved away from that. And there was two very different skill sets between the two Davids, but when we've got a mix of skill sets again, who'll be that number one running back? You got to think it'll be Philip Lindsay in terms of the pedigree, in terms of what he's shown on early downs. He talked about how he makes his money running through the tackles. But competition was certainly the element there, and they think that it'll work itself out comfortably at all positions, and that's quite difficult to do. But I think running back's one of them. I think at this stage, Philip Lindsay's got to be the leader, and I wouldn't dismiss Mark Ingram not being here, because I think at this stage his career over 30s, unless he's going to be another Frank Gore and buck the trend of 30 plus plus years age running backs that start to tail off at some point, then you've got to think perhaps that or David Johnson, one of the two, because I think Rex Burke has been brought here for a reason, and if he's healthy and if he's ready to go and if he's in a position to contribute, I think he stays here. So I would say Burkhead and Philip Lindsay have probably got a bit of an edge just in terms of being new and perhaps being a bit more suited to what they want to do in terms of running the ball. How David Johnson and how Mark Ingram will fit into that plan, then we'll see. A lot can change between now and then, but some interesting segments from the coaching staff.
Which I've told Ross, this is pretty much his first offseason in the NFL. It's not pretty much, it is because of last year. And so he's learning on the fly. He's getting better every day. And I'm expecting big things from Ross. I mean, he's a great kid. He's got a lot of ability. Now we got to tap into it and look forward to what he's going to do for us this year.
Final one really was Bobby King talking there about the impact of or the hopes that he has moving, has moved over from the linebackers coach Bobby King, one of the few holdovers in this staff. But he talked about, and perhaps he's almost the most important player on this roster in terms of what the Texans need from a jump from year one to year two and actually be a contributor, considering the lack of draft picks. He's the highest pick in a 3-year window, bar Titus Howard, is Ross Blacklock. And he's a guy that this team needs something from this season. He has to show he was worth the slate. He has to get off the ground and stay on his feet, lower the pad level, and be able to hold up far better at the point of contact than he did last year, because he looked lost. Whether that was conditioning, whether that was lack of technique, lack of coaching, it'll seem. But certainly Bobby King, one of the more sort of charismatic leaders, I think, in terms of that position. He did a great job with the linebackers. Less so last season with injuries, but overall I think he's definitely shown that he did a good job last year. He talked about how he's always been a defensive lineman, so I think hopefully if there's one of the coaching staff who can get a better jump out of the position, it's got to be Ross Blacklock, because there's a lot riding on him in terms of roster composition, considering the few picks we've had high in the draft, but he's one that's got to pay off if we're going to start to formulate the foundations of some sort of competitive roster.
And Ejiofor's got him. First NFL sack for Duke Ejiofor.
But perhaps, it's well documented, but we've had a lot of positions and a lot of players not pan out in the last few years, and I think the 2018 draft, obviously the first year after trading for Deshaun Watson, we had to sort of pay off some of that borrowing to go and trade up in 2017. But that draft class now is looking relatively dwindled in terms of those picks. Only 3 remain out of the 8, but I think with the Duke Ejiofor release this week, I think it's ultimately a one of regret, because I think in terms of pure evaluations from Brian Gain in that draft class, now we're at a point to acutely judge it in a pretty holistic way. we've got enough sample size now to make a judgment on it. But if you think of the evaluations, obviously Justin Reid dropped and a lot of issues with his brother, but he's unfulfilled his potential at this stage. Injury's a big part, but he's never really played and looked like the player that you thought he might be apart from year one. Obviously hoping he's going to be a bounce back year, and his position coach talked about that this week. It didn't look like he was taking too much on his plate. Obviously other guys moved to safety, new teammates at that position, and he was trying to do too much. So hopefully in this more simplified defence under Lovie Smith that everybody keeps referring to, he will have a bounce back year. But I think the thing for Justin Reid is he's not lived up to his potential so far. And then if you think of the mismanagement of Martinez Rankin, quite clearly a guard, played guard at Philadelphia week 15, week 16 in 2018, played well, stood up well against Fletcher Cox, looked like he had flashes to make it. He basically lost a bit of form pre-season, gets traded out and swapped with Kansas City for Carlos Hyde, but a guy who had potential as a starting left tackle in the SEC for Mississippi State, and you didn't develop him, you didn't get anything out of that. Same with Kiki QT, 4th round pick out of Texas Tech, Wes Welker's hand-picked guy, probably one of the top or two or three guys at slot receiver in that draft, but just simply hasn't played because he went to O'Brien's doghouse. Didn't get the snaps he required. His development was stunted. Jordan Thomas, again, year one, 6th round pick out of Mississippi State also, but a guy who had all the physical attributes, a wide receiver convert. Year one, brings in 4 touchdowns. He had a stretch of games, Denver on the road, at home against Miami, and against Tennessee on a Thursday night, where there was plays where the guy looked unplayable. The opening drive against Cleveland, the opening drive at Denver, like I mentioned, the guy looked like he belonged in this league as a starting tight end. He's blocking let him down at times, but that could have been improved. But again, much for personal reasons, he got injured in pre-season in 2019, and he was dismissed. And again, more talent comes into the building, not developed, and then relinquished on the side of the road. And these guys are, not all have picked up on the roster, but certainly, there's a lot of regret, I think, about their draft class, because it's pure evaluations given to the coaching staff by the front office. They didn't manage those guys well enough, and unfortunately, Duke Ejiofor, another guy whose career is just cut short by injury, and he flashed in that Detroit game in pre-season. He played in his rookie year. He played a number of snaps. Remember him filling in, spot filler at outside linebacker. In 3-4 over fronts against Dallas on the primetime game in 2018. He looked like he had all the measurables there to go and be a contributor in this league as a role player on defense. And there was a reason why coming out of Wake Forest he dropped to this position he did, but unfortunately Ejiofor is gone. But I think a big regret in terms of injuries. He was very unlucky. He got injured in training for the season before 2018. 2019, he gets rolled up on and he's out again, another injury. So failed physical designation for Duke. There was a reason why he went the 6th round, but everybody that saw him at training camp in year one, a hugely polished pass rusher, everybody was impressed with the technical ability. It was the availability and the lack of health that unfortunately lets the Houston native down, and another loss, and perhaps a draft class, another reason that compounds our lack of depth and roster quality overall. But just a bit of reflection there on that draft class and Duke Ejiofor. There was a report out there in a Minneapolis newspaper regarding the Texans' supposed interest in Kellen Mond at pick 66. Obviously, the Texans selected Davis Mills at pick 67, the one following, which is interesting in itself. The more you think about it, if you just take the fundamental points that we know prior to this, in fact, the Texans reported, or Kellen Mond's agent supposedly gave this news. Now, I don't know how commonplace contacting the agent is on draft night. My understanding is that teams contact the player directly. The scouts build the relationships in their areas with the players. Of course, they will speak to the agent at some point, but my understanding is people directly contact the player on draft night. And you saw that a couple of years ago when the Texans, one of the area scouts got screenshotted, or one of the guys said, just checking your mobile number, is there any other teams interested in you? And it was direct player via the scouts. So the scouts relationship, which Nick Caserio talked about in his analytics conference that he was at, which you can check out on YouTube, quite interesting in terms of his approach. And there's probably a lot to unpick there in terms of analytics, which he quite clearly probably didn't trust this year in terms of the process. But and predominantly relied on coaching inferences and relationships to make these picks. So, and he described the Texans actually as a startup in terms of their processes versus Kevin Demoff in LA, and about how they're kind of established and how they provide all the information and make their pick on draft night. So quite interesting. If you've not checked that, I suggest you do. But I think when you think about that pick, so I think for the first instance, the fact that it came from an agent, I don't think the Texans or at any team as a normal way of working contact the agent. So first and foremost, it makes me think that it's not necessarily true. And the second point, which I think perhaps makes me think it's worth dismissing, is the fact that all the reports, or certainly Davis Mills' family talked about celebrating prior to these other guys getting picked because they were told in advance that they were going to get selected. I mean, you look at Pep Hamilton, we've been over all that, but the links to the coaching staff is very clear. As I said, Caserio relied on that in this draft. And then I think what we've also got to put in mind is that if the Kellen Mond was the pick, then they've obviously had to put out a report, or they've had to put out that the fact that Mills had been told well in advance. They put that out in advance of this other rumour. And I think what I don't think Caserio is bothered about is what you think, and I don't think the team as a whole are too fussed about what you think about them and how they go about their business. They told you to trust them to do the right thing, and time will tell on that. And it's a very early stage to evaluate Caserio at this stage of only 6 months in. It's been a whirlwind 6 months, and there's still a lot to be decided and big moves to be made. But I don't think he necessarily cares about what you think and or what I think or what any of us really think from a fan or a media perspective. So the fact that was out there in advance, that would have had to be preconditioning of people's opinions of the pick to get ahead of what they thought might leak out later on. So the fact that I just don't think that's in their nature, I just don't think they care. They've shown that and a number of other things, makes me think we can dismiss that rumour. And obviously, as we said, Caserio's inherited a lot here, and he's got a big job. And as I think Steph Stradley tweeted out, but who do you trust? And I think at the minute on this team, there's nobody. There's some good signs of some more positive and more influential and better teachers and better coaching staff on this roster. The front office, as we said a couple of weeks ago, it's not really getting the overhaul that I suspected it might. So the front office and how that changes over time is a 2 to 3 evaluation of multiple moves around the margins, and big decisions all come together to field a competitive football team. But certainly in terms of Jerome Solomon's piece in the Houston Chronicle last weekend about ticket sales being down, I think it shouldn't be a shock to the team, and it shouldn't be a shock to anyone really, that the fact that people are less interested in parting with their hard-earned cash to go and watch this team this season. I talked about my kind of moment of realisation when I saw the roster written down, albeit 90 man, but it's certainly not anywhere near the levels of quality that it has been in previous years. There are no stars. We've been used to stars in this football club, and they're no longer there. Assuming, as we said, I said to prepare yourself, or I suggest you prepare yourself for a Deshaun exit shortly, but I think the team will feel the pinch financially this year, and as COVID conditions exit, you've got to assume that it'll be a full capacity. It might save their blushes that it did last year by not being able to have a full stadium, NRG Stadium, or on the road. But certainly you saw there was a limited capacity there. But when in the early stages of last season, you got to remember that even though we're at 25%, so it's about 12,500, 13,000 people in a 68,000 seater stadium, all those tickets weren't sold. So there was limited availability, but of that limited availability, it didn't sell out. So the team felt that last year, and that was very clear at the Minnesota game. There was a lot of tickets left for that game. After the 0-3 start, they go 0-4, O'Brien's fired. So they must have realised at that point, okay, we've got a problem selling tickets. Even though we've only got 25% available, people don't want to come and see this team because there was still a big hangover from everybody from the playoffs and the Andrew Hopkins trade last off-season. It was a culmination of things that just snowballed and snowballed. And is still doing that, and is still, is not finished collecting dirt as it goes down. But I think, the team will have to face into that reality, and I think, billionaires like Cal, as I said, happy to write checks, paying 3 GMs this season still, paid players off, etc. But if they've released him early, Kenny Still's a great example of that, paid his full contract when you should have just got him to opt out last year. So, the highest spending cash-wise in the league last year, despite only winning 4 wins. So they've been, happy to spend money, but in the McNairs. But I think that the big difference here is that actually when you've currently now seen a 12,000 waiting list disappear effectively. And I was one of those people that removed myself from the mailing list, something I've been on, or the waiting list I've been on for a number of years. You got to remember, at the turn of 2011, 2012, that waiting list was a far bigger number than 12,000. There was a huge demand for tickets at that point. Obviously, the team's been less successful in that. The Matt Sharp days, it felt like they were on the crest of a wave potentially, and that there was a good roster. Far removed talent-wise from what we've got on this roster now, but there's no stars to come and see. There's no stars to come and buy their jerseys. So the club will feel the revenue, not only in tickets, but also in merchandise, because there's no star quarterback, there's no star anybody. So hopefully there's not many things that Cal has taken notice of in the last few years, but certainly if there is a contraction of his bottom line, if revenues continue to decline for this ball club, which they will, in merchandising sales, in player jerseys, because there's no stars to buy their names, there's no guys to support, there's no one to come and see, regardless if you don't think the team's going to be all successful at an overall level. But there's limited reasons to root for this team this year, and you're starting to see that in ticket sales as people turn their back on the team. Now you'll always find a level of support in a city, in a market the size of Houston is, but hopefully this is maybe just one of the steps that will allow the team to realise the wrongs of past, and hopefully it'll allow them to perhaps influence decisions made and learn some lessons, because it certainly from the outside perspective doesn't feel like they've learned the lessons they should have had in the last few years. In the announcement on Friday, there was Jonathan Joseph retiring, and I think without doubt, we talked about it before, but the best signing of the Rick Smith era, probably the greatest free agent signing in the history of the franchise. Him and Daniel Manning came in and changed the way this defense played on the back end. It hadn't been a consistent unit. They hadn't had the players of the caliber and the type of mentality that they needed to be competitive on defense, kind of like the guys we're looking at this year at that point before Jonathan Joseph was signed. But he came in to this ball club and changed things, and he probably got out a good time. The way his career ended perhaps should have been better than being phased out gradually at the end of the 2019 season. But some great moments and just a real game changer and a real quality value signing. And there was obviously big names floating about in that free agency draft class in 2009, 2010, and those signings changed this ball club, and I think you will always remember Jonathan Joseph as a great player, and definitely one of the few players, Dwayne Brown perhaps when he retires, Arian Foster, and Jonathan Joseph's right up there as the next potential inductees to the Ring of Honor at NRG, because his career was that good and he did a lot. And I think one thing I would say about Jonathan Joseph was I had the pleasure to meet him in 2019, and one of the nicest, most humblest guys you could ever meet. And I've been lucky enough to meet some reasonably big sports stars through various parts of my life. But just on a different level, humble guy. You would never known he was in the position he was. You never know he was a great competitor athlete. Just couldn't give you enough of his time. Was delighted to speak to me and a couple of guys, and could not be nicer. And as he stood there, as his food got cold as he was leaving, he stood and talked to us that long, and just a genuine all round top bloke. And I think there isn't many like that. I think at this level of sport, and I think there's a reason why these guys from South Carolina all stick together, because they're all salt of the earth, great human beings. And I think he was a credit to this team, and he's a credit to South Carolina, and he is one of, without doubt, the best Texans defensive back in the history to date at the ball club. So I wish JJ all the best in retirement. And I think there's definitely a coach in there, because the way that players flocked him and gave him respect, I think there's definitely a coach in there. So maybe with the Texans, hopefully, still lives in Houston, living there for so long. He had the chance to go to Oakland a couple of years ago, wanted to stay for another 2 years, extended his stay. So hopefully you maybe see him back in some capacity, because having a guy like that around your ball club is only a good thing. So as the Texans sign an additional long snapper to give John Weeks some push in the training camp as it rolls around in a couple of weeks, probably one of the few places at the specialist spots you can really push one another, kicking competitions, long snapping competitions, punting competitions, to find the best at set pieces like that. You probably can improve around the margins more so than you can perhaps at other spots. But thanks again for listening this week. Really enjoying just getting some stuff out to you, as we're a bit short of time. Last week was recorded in an airport lounge. This week a bit more time to get something out to you, as life kind of takes over a little bit. But thanks everyone who reached out in terms of coming and doing some round table chats the next couple of weeks as we try and get through this kind of dearth of news cycle before training camp rolls back around. I'll put some more stuff out on social media. We've got the guys lined up for number 1, got already some guys lined up for number 2. So if there's enough interest, we'll do a 3 and a 4th and a 5th, potentially, depending on timelines between now and training camp. But thanks again for listening. Please reach out if you want to come and join us if you've not already. But you can check us out at podcasttexans.com, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. Thanks again.